Now, Benny Gantz, a member of the Israeli War Cabinet, says Hamas is no longer in control in large parts of the Gaza Strip, but Israel believes that 132 hostages are still being held there. Joining me from Tel Aviv now is Mark Regev, senior advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mark Regev, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So can I ask you first about what Dr. Harrington told me? This dovetails with what so many in the international community have been saying. And I just want to ask you, all your friends here in the US, everywhere, say, of course, Israel had to go on the offensive against the terror that was committed on October 7th. But that it turns out the longer it goes on, it's not being done right. So I guess I want to know from you, how long can a democracy, you call yourself a moral democracy, continue to watch this that's unfolding in Gaza right now, the children, the women?
I mean, we've just had a discussion about the crisis in the Gaza health system. And the obvious question has to be asked, why is there a crisis in the Gaza health system? Israel didn't want it. But as has been reported and documented, Hamas has a deliberate strategy of building its military structure inside hospitals. We would have much preferred that as humanitarian sites, that the hospitals would have been outside the conflict. But unfortunately, Hamas took a decision, a strategic decision, not in one hospital, not in two hospitals, but all across the Gaza Strip. Hamas built military infrastructure inside and underneath hospitals. We saw tunnels, we saw weapons. Hostages, the ones you mentioned a moment ago, who were kidnapped, abducted on October 7th, they reported being taken to and held in basements inside hospitals, not for medical treatment. They were held prisoner there. They were abused there. There is video from hospital videos showing the abducted people being rushed through the hospital. We know of command and control centers underneath hospitals. We were forced to fight around hospitals, and when we went into hospitals, we did so as surgically as is humanly possible to avoid harming the staff, the patients, and so on. But if there is a crisis in the health system in Gaza, it's clearly because of Hamas's deliberate behavior of using those hospitals as a shield against international law, as a shield for its military machine.
Mark Regev, I know that's your position, and I know that you found some tunnels. I also know, I know, I've seen them. I've seen your pictures of them. We have seen also many investigations by Western media organizations that haven't actually yet connected a hospital room to a command center or to a connection with a tunnel. However, that is your position. My question to you is, General Petraeus, Senator Van Hollen, leaders all over the world, the Secretary of State, the National Security Council, the President of the United States, of France, of the UK, everywhere, says, yep, you have a right to self-defense, but these civilian casualties are just too much. So my question to you is there not a military way to separate civilians and take care of civilians? As Petraeus said, he's been through many wars against terrorists in civilian areas. Was there not a better way?
First of all, we don't want to see any civilians killed. And I repeat that. We don't want to see any civilians caught up in the crossfire between Hamas and the Israeli Defense Forces. But having said that, we're up against a brutal and horrific enemy who deliberately embeds itself not just in hospitals, but in residential neighborhoods, in schools, in UN facilities, in mosques, and underneath Gaza, underneath the cities of Gaza, where cameras often cannot go, there is a subterranean terror network of tunnels, of bunkers, of missile launching sites, of armories of command and control. Hamas has had more than 16 years to embed itself, and that's why this operation will take time. And though we're doing our best to avoid civilians getting caught up in the crossfire, Hamas has a deliberate strategy of using civilians as a human shield, making our job just so much more difficult.
You've said that, but I want to ask you this. In that case, why then does a doctor, a British doctor, who went in with the approval of Israel and Egyptian and all the other permissions that they need to get with NGOs, why does she witness a truck that is being turned back full of babies' diapers? Why does Senator Van Hollen tell me and other international organizations, remember, Friends of Israel, that the onus on helping some of these civilians get aid in, humanitarian aid in, is on you now because it's so complicated to get these trucks in. And we're seeing them being turned back. Is there any way that you should and can speed up the delivery of humanitarian aid and medicine?
So I want to be clear, that truck specifically, and it's a good example because that truck specifically was both authorized by Israel and inspected by Israel. And it could have gone into the Gaza Strip from our perspective, but obviously there were problems at the border where Israel is not on the Egyptian-Gaza border for it to be stopped, and there wasn't room or something for it to go in that day. But Israel has opened up the additional crossing of Kerem Shalom because we want to make sure that humanitarian aid does reach the Gaza Strip, that the civilian population of Gaza is not the target of our military operation. There are other issues involved here, but that Israel did not prevent that truck from going in. I want to be 100% clear about that.
And yet the senator says that, I'm talking about the borders on the Israel-Gaza border, that it's way too slow, and that it's on you, because you control that, to actually speed it up. Also, we know from the UN that there are famine and pre-famine conditions stalking Gaza. And I guess the question is, well, the related question is, can you confirm that there has been, what the Qatar says, some kind of deal to send in some kind of humanitarian aid? Can you tell us what that is for the Israeli hostages and for the people of Gaza?
So first of all, I want to be clear. In the first week of this war, the Security Cabinet of Israel took a decision that as we pursue Hamas to destroy its military machine, and we must, at the same time, in parallel, there will be no restrictions whatsoever on food, water, medicine going into the Gaza Strip. And that is our policy.
So why then did your defense minister say there was a siege? He said it himself. No food, no water, no fuel, no medicine. That's what Yoav Gallant said.
I don't know what, no, it's not true.
On October the 9th.
You're talking about coming in?
Yes, going into Gaza.
You're talking about the crossings from Israel. So at the beginning, we allowed that to go through the Egyptian crossing at Rafah. And then we opened up, a few weeks later, we opened up when we saw there was a greater need. We opened up the crossing, Kerem Shalom, which is our crossing. But you have to understand, following the October 7th massacre, the feeling in Israel was, you know, the crossings were attacked by the Hamas terrorists. They were blown up. The whole idea that they just attacked us and we have to have business as usual with Gaza, that, of course, was difficult. In the end, we took a decision to open up the Israeli crossing because we wanted, and now we understand, to be frank, that what we are willing to inspect and send in, we could receive much more today from the international community to send into Gaza than we are capable of dealing with. If there's a holdup, it's not because of Israel.
Okay, well, again, that's not what the US senator says, who saw it. Let me ask you a different question. Partly because of what the world is witnessing and what leaders around the democratic world are witnessing to their increasing unease, and that is the civilian toll, you see what's happening. There is a growing, I'm going to use the word coalition, of Israeli allies saying that there must be, in return for normalization, as you want with Saudi Arabia and others in the region, there must be an absolute Palestinian process to statehood and an end of the occupation. Your own prime minister has apparently completely said no to that. I'm going to just play a little piece of what he said in a speech to the nation today.
Any agreement, with or without agreement, the state of Israel must control security between the Jordan River to the sea. And the clashes with the sovereignty idea, I'm telling our American friends, I stopped at a reality which would have hurt the security of Israel. The Prime Minister of Israel should have the ability to say no, even to our greatest friends, when he has to.
So that's it then. No political solution. You're basically telling your biggest friends and your biggest military suppliers, the United States, that no, you won't consider that kind of political solution.
I think it's very important to hear what the Prime Minister says in its entirety. He has repeatedly said that the Palestinians should have all the powers to rule themselves, but none of the powers to threaten Israel. And the second half of that formula, none of the powers to hurt Israel, is especially, I think, relevant following what happened on October 7th. We don't want to see ever again a repeat of that horrific attack on Israel by the Hamas terrorists or by any terrorists for that matter. And so the idea is to find a formula where the Palestinians can rule themselves, but not be in a position to threaten Israel. I think that's the formula that can help us move forward and find solutions that will be good for Israelis and good for Palestinians too.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I heard the Prime Minister say, granted it was in translation, but that it had to be essentially, I'm coining a phrase, from the river to the sea, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, that there must be Israeli security. I think that's what he said, and that's what you're saying, which flies in the face of what your partners are talking about in terms of an end to occupation and a Palestinian state. So I want to ask you particularly about the Saudis, because that was on the table. You're a diplomat, you know this better than I do. It was on the table before October 7th, and it's cropped up again. We heard the Saudi foreign minister in Davos talking about it. I just spoke to somebody very well known to you all, Prince Turki bin Faisal, former ambassador, former intelligence chief. This is what he said about what they believe needs to be the solution.
There is a lot of talk being put out by Americans, by Europeans about a two-state solution, but they've been talking the talk without walking the walk. I think what is needed is for them to put their feet down and simply go ahead and work with Saudi Arabia and other countries in the area to establish a Palestinian state and to end the fighting. The first important thing that must be done is to stop the killing.
And Mark Regev, just today, your president, Itzhak Herzog, called on dialogue between Israel, the Palestinians, over trying to figure out a way to end the endless cycle of violence and to prevent ever an October 7th happening again. So again, are you surprised that this is all coming to a head right now? I mean, it seems like the Prime Minister is trying to ward it off. And I have to say, frankly, many observers think that it's more about him and his own politics and staying in power than it is about a proper, just and fair and secure solution.
You know, Christiane, you and me have been following this process for more years than we'd like to remember. And I'd like to remind you of the last speech that Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin gave in the Knesset just before he was assassinated by a brutal enemy of peace and reconciliation, a fanatic that I hope will remain in jail forever and ever. But Rabin said that and he believed in peace. He was the father of the Oslo process. He said in final status peace, the Palestinians will have less than a state, because like Netanyahu today, Rabin understood that Israel would have to have security control in ways that would limit the full exercise of Palestinian sovereignty. Now, in the peace process since then, and as you know, there's always been talk about demilitarized and security controls and things like this. This is what Israel is talking about. And especially after October 7th, to ask the Israeli public, the Israeli people, to say, we'll light pedal security, that security isn't the highest priority to keep our people safe, that is to ignore reality. And if the Palestinians really want to move forward with Israel, I think they have to be willing to understand those concerns. They are legitimate concerns, and that the idea that any areas next to Israel there will have to be security arrangements that allow Israel to defend itself by itself if need be, that has to be the basis of any political settlements as we move forward.
So, I mean, that is your very clear position. And yes, I have, as you say, witnessed this Prime Minister hold that position. And here we are. Now, I want to ask you about what is the result after 100 days in your war against Hamas? The French president said, the total destruction of Hamas? Does anyone think that's possible? If that's that, the war will last 10 years. Journalist Ronan Bergman has written, in addition, the military pressure is not leading to the release of hostages. Talk to me about the hostages. The families still don't believe it's #1 priority.
It's definitely there at the top. And let me be clear. We achieved an amazing success in November where we got almost half the hostages out, 110 people released, precisely because of the military pressure Israel was applying. That was the only reason that Hamas didn't release the hostages, because they suddenly became nice people. No, they were responding, as President Joe Biden said, they respond to pressure, and Israel was applying the pressure through our military might. Now, if we would have accepted the advice of people in the international community at the beginning of November to go for some sort of humanitarian pause that was talked about, you'll recall, we would never have got a single one of those people out, and they were women and children, as you will recall, some very young children, all held by Hamas. They were released. So that's one of the major successes so far of our operation. But as we go forward, we've managed to destroy in northern Gaza Hamas's ability to work in an organized military framework, their battalion and brigades. We've managed to destroy them. They still have, of course, the ability to cause us harm, but to operate as an organized fighting force, they cannot longer. And we'll get there in the south too, in the center of the country, and in the south of the Gaza Strip as well. We will win this war, and we will destroy the Hamas military machine. We'll do it, Christiane, because we have no choice. We refuse to live any longer next to this terror enclave. And Israeli parents have to worry that in the middle of the night, terrorists will cross the border and murder their children. No, we refuse to live that way any longer.
Mark Regev, thank you so much. And as we mentioned earlier,